Henry VIII, the making of a tyrant. Welcome to History in the Shadows, where the forgotten stories of power, betrayal, and ambition come to life. If you're fascinated by the untold tales of history's most complex figures, you're in the right place. We dive deep into the shadows of the past to uncover the truth behind the legends. Today, we're exploring one of history's most infamous monarchs, King Henry VIII of England. A man who transformed from a Renaissance prince into a tyrannical king who defied the Pope, dissolved monasteries, and executed 2 of his 6 wives. But how did this happen? What turned a learned, athletic young king into one of history's most feared rulers? If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. If you're on Facebook, give us a follow and share this video with fellow history enthusiasts. Now, let's step back into Tudor England and witness the making of a tyrant. The Tudor shadow, the weight of a stolen crown in a dark Tudor-era royal chamber, under flickering torchlight and surrounded by stone pillars that cast deep shadows across the walls, stands King Henry VIII. He is a man of heavy build with a distinctive red beard, dressed in the magnificent attire befitting a Tudor king. Courtiers whisper nervously in the background, and the atmosphere is thick with fear and authority. This is a king who demands absolute obedience, a ruler whose very presence commands both respect and terror. But to understand Henry VIII, we must first understand the dynasty that created him. A dynasty built not on ancient bloodlines, but on ambition, violence, and the fortunes of war. In the cold stone halls of the Tower of London, 6 queens stand symbolically apart, all of them connected to Henry through marriage, though their fates would be vastly different. Anne Boleyn, with her pale face and dark hair, stands isolated in shadow, her expression anxious and fearful. Beside her, young Catherine Howard trembles in the torchlight. These women would pay the ultimate price for Henry's obsessions. The tragedy of their stories is written in the very stones of this fortress. The Tudor claim to power inside Westminster Hall, the seat of English power. Henry VIII dominates the center of the frame. Cardinals and priests stand tense in their ornate church robes, while nobles and knights lower their eyes, unable to meet the king's gaze. The power imbalance is absolutely clear. This is not a king who rules by consent. This is a king who rules by will, by force, by divine right claimed and enforced. In the throne room, Henry sits upon an ornate throne, his crown gleaming in the torchlight as bishops kneel reluctantly before him, receiving his royal decree. The heavy silence is broken only by the crackle of flames. This is power made visible, authority made absolute. But where did this power come from? Standing in a noble hall illuminated by firelight, Henry VIII positions himself before faded portraits of fallen English kings, monarchs who came before, whose failures and weaknesses paved the way for Tudor dominance. English nobles observe in silence, witnessing a fundamental shift in power and legacy. The fragile foundation. The truth is that the Tudor claim to the English throne was questionable at best, built on battlefield victory rather than unimpeachable hereditary right. In council chambers, English scholars in black robes debated quietly around wooden tables covered with maps of Europe, always aware of the unseen presence of royal authority. There was constant intellectual tension, the air thick with candle smoke and careful words. To understand Henry VIII's obsessions with legitimacy, succession, and male heirs, we must travel back to the origins of the Tudor dynasty itself. In a genealogical hall, Henry VII, Henry VIII's father and the first Tudor king, stands near the ancient throne, a slim man with sharp features. Nobles examine lineage scrolls by the dawn light streaming through windows. This is the birth of a dynasty, but it is a birth marked by uncertainty and the need for constant validation. The story begins even earlier, in the royal court of King Henry V, the great warrior king who conquered France. Here we find Owen Tudor, a young Welsh noble of modest attire, standing remarkably close to Catherine of France, the widowed queen in her golden gown. The forbidden intimacy between them is palpable, and the court tension is hushed and dangerous. A Welsh servant falling in love with the Queen of England, it was scandalous, impossible, and yet it happened. When their secret marriage was discovered, Owen Tudor sought sanctuary in Westminster Abbey, standing protected under stone arches with his young sons Edmund and Jasper Tudor beside him. Beams of colored light from stained glass windows created an atmosphere of sacred refuge. The church protected them when the court would not. Eventually, in the English Parliament chamber, Owen Tudor and his son Edmund were formally acknowledged and granted noble status. Standing respectfully nearby was Margaret Beaufort, a young noblewoman whose composed demeanour hid an iron will. This acknowledgement was crucial. It gave the Tudor family a foothold in English nobility, though their claim to the throne remained distant and disputed. The Beaufort connection, but the Tudor claim gained strength through another questionable lineage, the Beaufort family. In a medieval chamber lit by dim candlelight, we see John of Gaunt, a powerful nobleman of aristocratic bearing, sitting beside Catherine Swynford, a woman of modest noble dress. Their 3 Beaufort sons stand quietly nearby. This relationship was scandalous because it began in adultery, and though the children were later legitimized, their claim to the throne was always contested. The stone walls seem to hold the secret of their questionable legitimacy, and shadows emphasize the tension. In a royal interior, Margaret Beaufort, now a young adult with a pale face, noble gown, and veiled hair, holds her infant son Henry Tudor, wrapped in white cloth. Bishops and nobles observe this moment solemnly, understanding that this child represents dynastic hope for a family with ambitions far beyond their current station. The candlelit atmosphere creates a sense of destiny and danger intertwined. In a shadowed hall, King Richard III, the last Yorkist king, a man with sharp features and dark armor, looms in darkness like a predator. Margaret Beaufort and young Henry Tudor sit under guarded light, clearly in political danger. Richard III saw the Tudors as a threat, and they lived under constant surveillance and threat of elimination. The battle for England. Everything changed on August 22, 1485, at the Battle of Bosworth Field. Richard III, desperate and armoured, charges forward into the chaos of battle. Henry Tudor's army, carrying Tudor banners and advancing through smoke and dust, meets him in a clash of steel that would determine England's future. Richard III died that day, famously crying out, "A horse, my kingdom for a horse," as he was cut down. It was the last time an English king would die in battle. After the battle, in a council chamber, Margaret Beaufort, now displaying authoritative posture, reviews succession documents while nobles debate the legitimacy of her son's claim. Parchment maps cover the table, and torchlit shadows dance on the walls. The atmosphere is one of uncertain legitimacy. Henry Tudor had won the throne through conquest, but could he keep it? Did victory in battle truly make him the rightful king? In the Tudor throne room, Henry VII, now in his early middle age, slim and wearing the Tudor crown, sits firmly on the throne, his expression reserved and calculating. Margaret Beaufort stands aside, maintaining a clear separation of power. She had maneuvered brilliantly to put her son on the throne, but she knew when to step back. Warm torchlight illuminates what should be a moment of triumph, but Henry VII's face shows only wariness. He knows his crown is not secure. Threats to the throne pretenders and plots in a foreign court interior. Margaret of Burgundy, a sharp-eyed woman in a dark gown and sister to the defeated Yorkist kings, watches from the shadows. In the distance, Henry VII sits on his throne, a constant implied threat. Margaret of Burgundy would become Henry VII's most persistent enemy, funding pretenders and supporting anyone who claimed to be the rightful heir to the English throne. The candle smoke drifting through the scene creates an atmosphere of political intrigue and conspiracy. In a European council hall, foreign princes and nobles gather around a table arranged like a chessboard, discussing Yorkist pretenders as if they were pawns in a game of strategy. These conspirators saw England's instability as an opportunity, and they were willing to support anyone who might overthrow the Tudor upstart. In Dublin Cathedral, a teenager named Lambert Simnel is crowned before cheering Irish lords in armour and robes. An archbishop blesses the ceremony with all due solemnity. But Simnel was a fraud, a commoner pretending to be a Yorkist prince. The torchlit stone arches of the cathedral cannot hide the false nature of this kingship. Henry VII would eventually defeat Simnel's forces, and rather than execute the boy, he gave him a job in the royal kitchens, a calculated act of mercy designed to show the pretender's insignificance. But a more dangerous pretender emerged. In a Burgundian courtyard, John de la Pole, a genuine Yorkist claimant with calculating eyes and dark cloak, stands with mercenaries led by Martin Schwartz, a hardened soldier in armor. The conspiracy is forming, backed by real money and real soldiers, under cold stone walls and an overcast sky. In a medieval Paris chamber lit by candlelight and filled with shadows, Margaret of Burgundy receives Perkin Warbeck, a young man with a pale face and dark robe who nervously claims to be the Duke of York, one of the princes supposedly murdered in the Tower of London. Stone columns tower above them, and hushed nobles whisper in the background. Warbeck's claim was more sophisticated than Simnel's, and he would trouble Henry VII for years, receiving support from Scotland, Ireland, and Burgundy. At a harbour at dusk, Perkin Warbeck stands near damaged ships, his dark cloak billowing in the wind as armed followers gather anxiously around him. Storm clouds gather overhead, and torchlight reflects on the water. This is the atmosphere of a failed invasion, of grand ambitions destroyed by reality. Eventually, Warbeck was captured. In a London street procession, he is paraded on a wooden cart, restrained and exhausted in his dark robe. An angry crowd jeers from the narrow stone streets as guards with halberds and armor escort the prisoner. This is public humiliation, designed to destroy any remaining belief in his royal claim. Victory but no peace in a Tudor throne room lit by low firelight. Henry VII sits on his throne in quiet victory, his lean build and controlled authority on full display. Courtiers stand tense nearby. Henry has secured power, but at what cost? The cold silence filling the hall speaks of fear rather than love, obedience rather than loyalty. In a royal chamber dimly lit by candlelight, Henry VIII, still a child in this scene, stands staring at an empty cradle. Around him, wives and advisors wear somber expressions. The Tudor dynasty's great weakness was becoming clear: the difficulty of producing male heirs who survived infancy. Henry VII and his wife Elizabeth of York suffered multiple heartbreaking losses. In a mourning hall, an elderly and tired Henry VII sits in dark robes as small memorial cradles line the floor, each one representing a child who died. Court figures in black attire bow their heads, and soft chants fill the air. The grief and fragility of the dynasty is emphasized in every detail. The prince who would be King Arthur's brief hope, yet there was hope. In a cathedral interior bathed in golden light, Elizabeth of York, a gentle young woman in a royal gown, stands beside her newborn son, Prince Arthur, wrapped in silk. Nobles and clergy watch with genuine hope. This child represented dynastic renewal, the promise that the Tudor line would continue. In a Tudor court ceremony, young Prince Arthur, dressed in royal robes but with a fragile posture, sits formally as foreign envoys, particularly Spanish diplomats, observe carefully. This is the atmosphere of post-war stability, the hope that England could finally move beyond the chaos of civil war. A Spanish princess named Catherine of Aragon, wearing a formal gown and veil, enters England in a royal reception hall. She is greeted by young Prince Henry, not yet king, just a bright-eyed child in noble attire, who leads her forward into her new country. Warm torchlight creates a ceremonial welcome. Catherine was meant to marry Arthur and become Queen of England, cementing an alliance between England and Spain. In the peaceful courtyards of Greenwich Palace, Tudor nobles in rich fabrics move through grand stone architecture. Banners flutter in the breeze, and guards with halberds stand watch. This is the image of peaceful royal life that Henry VII desperately wanted to project. The making of Henry VIII, but fate had other plans. Prince Arthur died young, and suddenly the future of England rested on his younger brother, Henry. In a chapel baptism scene, Bishop Richard Fox in clerical robes baptizes the infant Henry VIII while Anne Luke, a woman in simple dress, watches with caring attention. This is a sacred, quiet moment, but already the machinery of royal destiny is turning. In a royal chamber, the infant Henry VIII is presented with ceremonial symbols while courtiers in noble attire stand respectfully. Early power and destiny are already being attached to this child who was never meant to be king. In a great hall investiture, the infant Henry VIII, still wrapped in white cloth, is honoured with the title of Warden of the Scottish Marches. Knights and clergy in ceremonial armour and robes witness this solemn rite. Even as a baby, Henry is being prepared for a life of authority. Education of a Renaissance prince in a Tudor palace garden at sunset, 9-year-old Prince Henry sits on a stone bench, his sharp eyes and calm intelligence evident even at this young age. Beside him, Thomas More, the great humanist scholar in his black robe and thoughtful expression, teaches from books. Soft birdsong fills the air, creating an atmosphere of learning and wisdom. In a grand Tudor hall lit by candlelight, palace attendants and members of Mountjoy's household stand respectfully as the young prince receives writings from Thomas More. There is quiet admiration in the air. This is a prince of extraordinary intelligence and promise. In a wood-panelled study at night, Erasmus, the greatest scholar of the age, a thin-faced man in dark robes, writes intensely at his desk. His quill moves quickly, the candle flickers, and the scene radiates intellectual urgency. Erasmus and More would shape young Henry's mind, filling it with Renaissance ideals of learning, virtue, and enlightened rule. In a scholarly chamber, William Lord Mountjoy presents letters to Erasmus, who looks surprised and analytical. Manuscripts are spread across the table, creating an atmosphere of discovery and curiosity. These scholars saw in young Henry the potential for a truly learned king, a ruler who could combine power with wisdom. A court of culture in a royal music chamber, the reserved Henry VII listens to court musicians playing lutes and singing. This is ritual and tradition, a controlled expression of culture under royal authority. But young Henry VIII would transform this. In a chapel royal interior, the young adult Henry VIII, now broad-shouldered and radiating confident presence in rich Tudor clothing, listens to the choir while Dionysius Memo, the court organist, plays the grand organ. Sacred music fills the space, and Henry himself is an accomplished musician who will compose his own works. The burden of succession, the weight of destiny in a private chamber, 10-year-old Prince Henry stands alone near a fireplace, his expression serious and contemplative. Shadowed courtiers hint at the future power that awaits him. This is the moment of heir-apparent realization, the understanding that his brother's death means he will one day be king. In a diplomatic chamber, the Duke of Estrada, a Spanish noble with calculating expression, considers marriage plans. Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, the powerful Spanish monarchs, observe silently. Young Henry's marriage to his brother's widow Catherine is being planned, a decision that will have profound consequences decades later. In a throne room, Henry VII weighs this Spanish alliance carefully, his eyes cautious and his posture firm. Advisors whisper behind him. This is strategic diplomacy at the highest level. Marriages were not about love but about alliances, about power, about the future of kingdoms. In a ceremonial hall, Henry VII honors Philip of Burgundy, a Flemish noble, while the court witnesses the event. Political courtesy and underlying tension fill the atmosphere. Every diplomatic interaction is a careful dance, a balancing act between competing powers. In a dim council chamber, Henry VII sits contemplatively while diplomats discuss Ferdinand of Aragon with anxious voices. Shadows suggest rivalry and distrust. Henry VII was a master of diplomacy, playing European powers against each other, extracting every advantage. In a negotiation chamber, Henry VII meets foreign envoys with a subtle smile and calculating gaze. Maps and treaties are visible on the table. This is the art of manipulation and balance of power politics that Henry VIII will inherit. The changing European landscape in a symbolic royal hall, Henry VII studies a mural depicting the changing political landscape of Europe while courtiers whisper behind him. This is an end-of-era transition. The medieval world is giving way to something new, something more centralized and absolute in its power. In the French royal court, Louis XI of France, a calculating monarch with sharp features, observes his nobles and clergy. Rising nationalism and centralized royal power are replacing the old feudal order. From a panoramic European vista, Charles VIII of France in royal armor surveys his expanding kingdom, the Alps visible in the distance. This is an age of strength and territorial ambition. In a Spanish throne room, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile stand united, their presence commanding and resolute. They have completed the Reconquista, driving the last Muslim kingdom from Spain, and are building a unified Spanish nation. In allegorical court scenes across Europe, monarchs study expanding borders on maps while their advisors watch nervously. Rivalry and the balance of power define this era. No single kingdom can be allowed to dominate, or all the others will unite against it. In a French throne room, Louis XI dominates his court as nobles bow before him. Central royal authority is systematically replacing the old feudal power structures that had fragmented medieval kingdoms. The new learning in a Renaissance study, scholars and nobles in learned attire examine ancient texts. Roman statues and manuscripts glow in the firelight. This is the revival of classical knowledge, the renaissance that is sweeping across Europe, transforming how people think about government, religion, art, and human potential. In a political chamber, English statesmen in sober Tudor clothing argue over governance, law books open before them. There is tension visible in every gesture. This is the decline of the old feudal order, the birth of something new, though what exactly that will be remains unclear. The transition of power, parliamentary tensions in a Tudor council chamber, Parliament nobles argue loudly around a long table, their expressions tense and their voices raised. One royal official stands apart near a window, calm and showing restrained authority. This is the atmosphere of power struggle, between king and nobles, between old privileges and new royal power. In a royal chamber with a fireplace, the young adult Henry VIII listens carefully as advisors debate the failures of past rulers. This is a moment of reflection and correction, the new generation learning from the mistakes of the old. In a dim hall, English nobles debate the concept of self-governance, their expressions mixed between hope and doubt. One thinker in modest dress studies an old manuscript thoughtfully. These are ideals versus reality, the theory of good government confronting the messy truth of human ambition and self-interest. In a Tudor parliament chamber, officials from the Lancastrian era sit beneath faded banners, their faces weary. One observer with a neutral stance watches as the old order's failures become undeniable. This is the atmosphere of disillusionment with the past. Trust in princes in a loyalty hall, Tudor supporters face royal symbols with reverent posture. One scholar reads quietly, reserved and analytical. This is the mood of obedience and faith in monarchy, the belief that a strong, wise king is the solution to England's problems. In a throne room, Henry VII is portrayed in a large tapestry, his lean figure and sharp eyes commanding respect. Courtiers look upward with reverence. This is the theme of trust in princes, the idea that royal authority, properly exercised, can bring order and prosperity. In a private study, Henry VII writes at his desk, surrounded by ledgers and letters. Candlelight highlights his patient, strategic mind. This is silent ambition and careful calculation. Henry VII was not a warrior king but an administrator, a man who built power through careful financial management and diplomatic maneuvering. In a treasury chamber, Henry VII reviews full exchequer accounts, his expression composed and deliberate. Confiscated noble crests hang on the wall, evidence of rivals destroyed, of threats eliminated. This king chose wealth over military glory, understanding that money was the foundation of lasting power. In an aristocratic chamber, Henry VII meets with an English peer and a clergyman. The peer shows restrained resentment, the clergyman cautious neutrality. Henry VII deliberately separated himself from the old nobility, refusing to be dependent on their support or constrained by their expectations. In a legal council room, Henry VII consults with lawyers and churchmen who are disciplined and professional. Common citizens watch hopefully from the shadows. This is the theme of order over magnates, royal justice protecting the common people from aristocratic oppression. The new king on the steps of a coronation hall, Prince Henry, now in his late teens, wearing royal armor and robes with confident posture, stands before the throne as subjects look on with loyal expressions. Destiny is approaching, and everyone can feel it. In a public hall, the young King Henry VIII greets the crowd with a charismatic smile, his athletic build and radiant presence captivating the people of England who respond with joyful admiration. This is popular loyalty in its purest form, a handsome, learned, athletic young king who seems to embody everything England could hope for. In a royal gallery, Elizabeth of York is shown in living presence beside Henry VIII, who gazes at her with respect. Her refined beauty and calm dignity created a tone of maternal grace. She had been beloved, and her death in 1503 left a void in both her husband and her son. In a palace courtyard, Henry VIII rides a horse with remarkable skill, his tall, athletic frame and auburn hair gleaming in the sun. Courtiers watch with astonished admiration. This is physical dominance and natural charm, everything his father was not. In a city square celebration, Henry VIII stands before cheering people as laurel banners wave. This is golden future optimism, the belief that a new age has dawned, that England's troubles are over. In a great hall, Henry VIII distributes gold generously to courtiers and subjects, who respond with visible gratitude. This is wealth used as power, generosity as a tool of kingship. In a symbolic throne hall, the empty throne dominates the frame as young Henry VIII steps forward with resolute stance. Nobles stand in silent respect. Authority is consolidating around this magnetic young king. The road to war in a peace council chamber, Henry VIII weighs a parchment document concerning the Holy League with thoughtful restraint. Advisors look on cautiously. This is fragile peace about to shatter. On a naval deck at sea, Henry VIII in armored cloak stands aboard a warship with fatigued soldiers. The mood is one of alliance strain. England is being drawn into European conflicts. In a Vatican chamber, the Pope confers intensely with Henry VIII and Ferdinand. This is church crisis and destiny, the complex relationship between religious authority and royal power that will eventually lead to England's break with Rome. Wolsey's rise in a royal chamber. Thomas Wolsey, an intelligent, ambitious cleric, stands at a desk reviewing documents while Henry VIII and advisors remain half-lit in the background. Power is quietly shifting. Wolsey, the son of a butcher, is rising to become the most powerful man in England after the king himself. In a Spanish council room, Ferdinand studies a map of Navarre with calculating eyes while advisors observe discreetly. Strategic conquest is being planned, and England will be drawn into these schemes. In a military encampment, English soldiers loiter restlessly near maps and supplies, their discipline faltering. England's early military adventures are not going well. In a royal chamber, Henry VIII gestures angrily at a map of Europe while advisors exchange uneasy glances. This is military failure and frustration, the young king learning that war is more complex than he imagined. The education continues in a Spanish court. Ferdinand confidently deflects blame and explains strategy to courtiers. There is deception beneath the diplomatic language, and Henry is beginning to understand that his allies are not always honest. In a private chamber, Ferdinand studies campaign plans alone, his motives hidden and complex. In a confession chamber, the aging Ferdinand kneels before his confessor. This is a mood of mortality and repentance. Even the most calculating rulers must eventually face their conscience and their God. In a diplomatic chamber, Henry VIII speaks with sincere resolve to Ferdinand, framing political maneuvering in terms of religious duty. Henry genuinely believed in the Christian mission against the Turks and the defense of Christendom. The web of intrigue in a papal embassy study, a Spanish ambassador writes deceptively to the Pope by candlelight. This is the tone of secrecy and manipulation that defined Renaissance diplomacy. In a formal court address, Louis of France appeals publicly with outward piety while Ferdinand observes from shadow. This is political theatre, performance masking calculation. In an Italian council chamber, Italian nobles debate warily as a Spanish guard watches silently. Betrayal is in the air. In an alliance chamber, Henry VIII, Wolsey, and Maximilian stand in strained negotiation. Shifting alliances create an atmosphere of distrust and uncertainty. In a private royal chamber, Henry VIII appeals emotionally and earnestly while Wolsey observes with caution. This is the tone of naive trust that Henry will eventually lose as he gains experience. Conclusion: the making of a king in a command chamber. Wolsey stands isolated and burdened as angry commanders glare at him. Political backlash is building against the cardinal's growing power. On a riverfront balcony, Henry VIII watches his fleet depart on the Thames with resolute determination. Nobles stand supportively behind him. This is naval power being projected, England asserting itself on the European stage. In a night naval assault, Sir Edmund Howard leads boats toward enemy galleys under moonlight. This is high-risk bravery, the kind of military action that would define Henry's reign. As Henry VIII arrives at Calais in full armor, commanding and confident with his nobles and troops behind him, we see a king coming into his own. This is campaign momentum, the beginning of England's renewed military involvement in continental Europe. At dawn in the military encampment, Henry VIII rides through the camp addressing his weary but inspired soldiers. This is leadership in action, a king who will not merely send men to war but will join them, fight alongside them, share their hardships. In a courtly courtyard, Henry VIII plays music before Margaret of Savoy with charismatic charm. This is diplomacy through personal magnetism, using his considerable charm as a political weapon. In a northern stronghold at night, Catherine of Aragon oversees military banners and preparations with determined leadership. War readiness fills the air. Catherine proved herself a capable regent during Henry's absence, managing the kingdom and even overseeing military victory against the Scots. On a battlefield in the aftermath of Flodden, King James IV of Scotland lies motionless among torn banners and mud. The silent dawn speaks of finality and consequence. England has defeated Scotland decisively, and Catherine sent Henry a piece of James's blooded coat as a trophy. Back in a royal chamber, the victorious Henry VIII sits elevated as courtiers praise his success. A Spanish envoy watches uneasily. This is validation, proof that Henry can succeed where others doubted him. In a writing chamber, Henry VIII writes correspondence with calm authority as the diplomat Justinian listens carefully. Peaceful intent is emphasized. Henry wants to be seen as a peacemaker as well as a warrior. But in a strategy chamber, Henry stands thoughtfully before a map of Europe as cautious advisors observe. The limits of power are becoming clear. Even a victorious king cannot reshape Europe according to his will alone. This is where we pause our story, with a young King Henry VIII who has tasted both victory and betrayal, who has learned both the glory and the limits of power. He is still the athletic, learned, charismatic prince who captured England's imagination. But the seeds of the tyrant are already being planted. Thank you for watching History in the Shadows. If you enjoyed this journey into Tudor England, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Share this video with anyone who loves history's most fascinating and complex figures. And leave a comment below, what aspect of Henry VIII's reign would you like us to explore next? Until next time, keep exploring the shadows of history.